Good morning. Welcome to our February Sustainability, Housing Efficiency, and Neighborhoods Subcommittee agenda. Thank you all for joining us today. We have a packed agenda, so we are going to get started. Did you?
I was just waving to someone.
Wonderful.
Sorry.
We start the meeting with a call to the public, but we have no cards from the public. All cards are on agenda items, so we'll move to approval of the meeting minutes from our December meeting.
So moved?
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. That passes unanimously. We have a consent agenda with a variety of important work, including moving forward on homeless outreach and several housing items, and a name change for the Environmental Quality Commission to become this Environmental Quality and Sustainability Commission. We have several cards marked in favor. We have an Environmental Quality Commissioner here today in support. We have cards in support of several of the items. Would we, none opposed? With that, I would entertain a motion.
Motion to approve the consent agenda?
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Passes unanimously. Item number 7 is excess property disposal, and we actually have a request from one member of the subcommittee that we start with item number 8, since item number 7 is not for action, if that's, is that right?
Madam
Well,
Chair, no, that's incorrect. I'm so sorry. The item that is not for action, that is designated for action, is item number 10. So 7 does require action.
We welcome our Deputy City Manager, Paul Blue, up
Did I get
here.
that wrong, Penny?
No.
Okay. Sorry.
So we are going to item number 7, which is excess property disposal update, which will be heard for action.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. We're here today to discuss with you staff's efforts at your direction to dispose of excess city real estate. With me today is Tim McBride, who's an MA2 from the city manager's office, and Jamie Spear, who's the assistant real estate administrator from the finance department. What the property review team for staff, this is, I know you know this, but I want to just remind it both for you and anybody who may be watching online, is we meet regularly with a collected group of staff from finance, from economic development, from the planning department, from budget and research, and from the manager's office to have a coordinated team effort to try to cut through more quickly the decision-making about bringing recommendations from staff, to bring recommendations to you about properties to dispose and evaluate those properties that are in the city's inventory. And so we're doing two things. We're trying to evaluate all property of the city and to determine that is it in current use and will it stay in that current use for a period of time, and if not, is it available to dispose now or under what conditions? And so we're working real hard to pursue that. I think we're going to give you some metrics today to share with you our progress on that front. And our focus is to continue to come back to this subcommittee each time it meets until we have moved through this initial pass through the inventory. And so our goals for today is to give you an update on progress. We want to introduce a new website to transparently share with the public the property that is available for disposal. We're going to share an update on pursuing a procurement to get multiple options for real estate brokerage services on behalf of the city and marketing our excess property. And then finally, to request your recommendation to the full city council to dispose of 61 parcels. And that will represents 26 from the finance department, who are representing a variety of city departments, 34 from the housing department, and 1 from the neighborhood services department. And so let's talk about our progress report real quickly. So when we first met with you in December, the little bar you see up there represents about 70 parcels we had gone through the last time we met with you. Since that time, we've actually moved through, and that was only the street transportation department. We've moved through 6 other departments and have evaluated 1,000 properties. And that is out of the 5,500 that are currently in the city's estimated inventory. The result is that we had estimated between 200 and 300 parcels that were vacant based on staff's preliminary view, and this is what we told you when we were with you in December. we have identified now at working through these 6 departments that we're at excess of about 490 parcels. And so we've made some progress. But I do want to point out in this inventory, we're starting to collect all of the areas where the city council has given prior authorization to dispose of property, so that at this subcommittee, you have a view on all of the properties. So as an example, the housing department had previous authority from the city council to dispose of about 350 parcels. We're starting to make sure we have a singular location that this is represented coming to this subcommittee. So since June of 14, we had showed you about 90 parcels disposed, and today we're going to tell you that we're at 131 that are disposed since we last saw you. The revenue when we previously were with you was $9.6 million. The revenue today is $17.8 million. And so we are not done. There is substantial work to do. We're continuing to follow your direction. And you will continue to see, as you see today, I believe, continued requests for your authorization to and recommendation to the full city council to dispose of property as we proceed forward. And so with that brief intro, I'd like to hand the presentation over to Tim, who's going to share with you our use of the web as a tool to share properties that are available.
Thank you, Paul. And good morning, Vice Mayor Gallego, members of the subcommittee. As you may recall, back in December, Paul mentioned that one of the immediate objectives of the property review team was to create a website where the public could go to see a list of properties that were for sale. And so I'm happy to report that that site's ready to go live March 1st, and we can preview some of the features today. So first off, some of the goals that the team had. We wanted the site to be easy to find. We wanted the site to be easy to use for the public, and we wanted it to be easy to maintain. First off, easy to find. For the first time in the city's history, the public can go to the city's main webpage, phoenix.gov, and see a link to properties for sale. So the big green button in the middle of the page, doing business for Phoenix, to this section we've now added a tab that says properties for sale. And if the public clicks on that, they'll be taken to the new website, and which looks like this. It has a big map at the top showing properties and then a list at the bottom. Let me go back, sorry. I want to highlight some of the features of this page. First off, the public can sort properties either by zip code, council district, price, square footage, etc. They can click on a property to get a call-up box that provides more information. From there, they can click on a link to a brochure. So each property will have a PDF brochure that can be downloaded or saved for future reference. The site also has a separate tab. It's kind of hard to see, but if you click on sold properties, there'll be a list of properties that have been sold in the past few years. I'd like to mention finally that the site is easy to maintain. It was created using some GIS software that the city currently licenses, and it's designed to be easy to be updated by real estate staff whenever there are new properties that are going to the broker or to be RFP'd. Those can be added pretty quickly, and also as properties sell, they can be added to the sold list as well. So with that, I'd like to hand the clicker off to Assistant Real Estate Administrator Jamie Spear. Jamie is going to give an update on brokerage services and then walk us through the staff recommendation on the 61 properties that Paul mentioned.
Good morning, Vice Mayor Gallego and members of the subcommittee. We are beginning to work on a brokerage services QVL. Currently, the city is under contract with JLL, Jones Lang LaSalle, for brokerage services. It's a non-exclusive contract, however, they really specialize in commercial. So we would like to create a qualified vendors list of several different types of service providers for marketing our property, selling, leasing, market analysis, and property management as needed. The goal is to go to City Council for approval of the QVL this fall. So properties for disposal, the Finance, Housing, and Neighborhood Services departments have several properties for disposal. The Finance Department will be requesting approval through formal to quitclaim properties that have little or no value to the city, or to clear property or title issues. This is an example of a quitclaim. There was a development agreement on this property in which the plat excluded the little rectangular areas in the backyards of these properties. So we would request approval to quitclaim. This next example are properties we acquired for light rail. This was a condominium complex in which we needed to do a cut and reface. This went through condemnation, and we acquired the condominium units that you no longer see. The condos were demolished, but the assessor still shows us as the owner. That property is controlled by the community HOA, so we would like to quitclaim it back to clear up those title issues. Our first property that we would like to list with the broker is 122 South 27th Avenue. It's approximately 8,000 square feet and is improved with an 855 square foot house. It was purchased with public housing funds, and the house has been vacant for quite some time, so it needs a lot of work. The second property we would like to list with a broker was formerly a barber shop, and there's actually 3 APNs with this property. The barber shop has been empty for at least 10 years, a little bit longer. And then there's also the parking beside of it, a vacant site or unapproved site with a storage building. And the third property we would like to list with the broker is an unapproved portion of a fire department site. It's at the rear of 220 East Rozier Road. It's approximately 29,000 square feet, zoned R4, and even though it's got a Rozier Road access, which is the fire department's address, a Rozier Road address, access is from East Cody Drive. The housing department will be presenting their plans for an RFP on 34 Matthew Henson properties that were acquired for Hope 6. And NSD will also provide information on an upcoming RFP for a vacant site at 814 North 5th Avenue.
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, for both of those two, the next 2 items on the agenda actually are going to provide you the opportunity to have your advice and direction as to the terms and conditions of an RFP. Today, we're just asking in this item for authorization to dispose.
Now I'll turn it back over to Paul to summarize.
So, well, I think I just did. So, my fault, Jamie. I should have just let you do that. Again, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, as outlined in your report, we're requesting authority to dispose of 61 parcels, some quit claim, some with a broker, and some by RFP. And we're prepared to answer any questions you may have.
Wonderful, thank you. And it's timely that we are having this presentation this week. We are also having an event to mark the 10-year anniversary of the Bioscience Campus, which was once vacant land and is now $1.3 billion of economic activity. So we have done some great things with our vacant land, and $17.8 million generated from this effort is also going to be, we will be able to put that money to good work. So thank you for your efforts on that. And it's great to have Tim working on this. It shows how seriously our city management is taking this effort. So we'll be doing more to come, but I think we're going to be doing a lot of good things and putting the property to good use. We do have a card from Greta Rogers.
Good morning, members of the subcommittee. My name is Greta Rogers. I first brought this subject up to the council 10 years ago and was looked upon like I belonged at 24th and Van Buren, which doesn't surprise me as a reaction from mayors and councils of this city. We have an oversupply of inert assets. An inert asset is a drug on the market. It produces nothing. I'm glad that Paul and his assistants are working to develop a plan to dispose of over 6,000 properties that the city of Phoenix owns, many of which are undevelopable. And as I've discussed with him, I have had 2 long meetings with him. You take those, you quit claim them, half to A and half to B, and put them on the tax rolls and pay the recording fee and be done with it. I'm looking forward to the development of this plan to be executed with care and with the assistance of qualified real estate brokers within the fields of commercial, industrial, and residential, and there are variables within each one of those fields. This is going to take several years. You don't dump a bunch of property on the market because that indicates fire sale and you'll get 20 cents or less on the dollar. So I want this to be a very structured and intelligent plan with a proposed time frame that will vary according to economic fluctuations, which none of us can predict. But I commend Paul for the beginning of a very long and overdue project to put assets on the market and have them be productive for the city. Thank you.
Councilman Waring.
Just a couple things. So when people ask us, because I've had this happen, how do we find the properties and so forth, before this didn't exist, can you just send them a video of this meeting? I mean, it sounds funny, but actually, it just seemed like it laid it out, and it just seems like that might be better, actually, than a staffer trying to explain it on the phone. Just say, hey, can we email this? Because, I mean, it took you right to where you're supposed to go, what you're going to find there. I would encourage you to do that. That was actually a serious suggestion.
Councilman, we'd be pleased to do.
But what could be more clear? I mean.
Yes, I think Tim and the IT staff are being a little bit modest. We actually are, for the first period of time at a minimum, and we'll see how people click through. We're actually going to almost on the website provide that step-by-step basis that Tim described, and kind of a splash screen that lets you be working on the website, and here's the ABC pathway for how do you use it. But the video is a great suggestion.
As somebody who I'm talking about, like, someone calls in or something, hey, do you have an email? And then call back and talk to us after that.
Yeah,
or send it to our office too. I guess we can download this.
We
but
can
don't need the
clip.
beginning of
We'll
it.
make sure to clip this portion of the
Yes,
item.
exactly.
So we just get this portion that's at.
It'd be a helpful thing for me.
We
So,
would be pleased to do it and make that happen.
Can I ask 2 more real quick ones? The 17.8 million, where does that go? Does it depend?
Yes, it depends, as all things. In cases where it is the general fund's money, and that is to say there is no historic bonds that are needing to be replenished or anything like that. It just goes into the city's revenue stream, just like all other revenues of the city. Where there are specific either enterprise funds, again, unique to the city, those funds, or specialty funds like transit or police or the airport or the water department, those funds return to those departments. And then the last category, which is the most complicated, and I'm probably not qualified to precisely say how this works, but when we have federal dollars that were originally involved in the acquisition, sometimes they involve a requirement to reinvest that resource back into so in the housing department, there are some fairly complicated things. Cindy, in this next item, will describe to you what happens with her resources and the requirements for reinvestment. In fact, in her area, I think there are multiple ways you're obliged to do that. But in general, if it's the general fund's money, it returns back to and just becomes revenue of the city. We would acknowledge, I think Jeff Barton would say, these are one-time revenues and not to be a continuous source. And then all the other cases, they tend to be a requirement to be reinvested in the source of money that the original purchase came from, whether enterprise or some other grant required dollars.
And then, Madam Chair, just one more. So one that isn't on there that isn't one time is the savings from us having not to keep track of this property, clean it up, and so forth. I don't think I saw a dollar figure on that. Maybe it's impossible to get. I don't know.
Madam Chair, Councilman Waring, I don't think it's impossible, although I will admit to you that the collection of the information about
Take a
that
while. I don't
is
want you
is
to do it.
diffuse. But I think that's a worthy question to be able to answer.
We're saving money every year that we don't have these properties on there, and that is ongoing, because some of these properties, I was just talking about one at a meeting before this. I think the city owned it since 1991, and then sold it relatively recently, so it's like 25 years, basically.
It
It's
is-
good to get that off the books, because that accumulates over time.
I think in two ways, Councilman. One is the maintenance of it, and that is that's a direct hard cost. You know, we've
We gotta
owned.
pay people to do it.
We have to have someone go out and clean the weeds off when it rains and so on, and pick up any trash that's accumulated. I think the second area that's probably impossible to monetize, but I would tell you that the law department and risk management would tell you it's an absolutely real thing, and that is the liability we own for owning land that we're not actively using. And whether it's as simple as slip and fall or other kinds of things that are not imaginable that occur, when things that we aren't using or don't have a near-term use, it is better to, in some cases, it is better for us to not have those. Where we have a future use and it's a specialized piece of property that will be hard to reproduce, we'll be talking about those with you in subsequent meetings where we may not have the use today. I'll give you an example. There's a fire station. I can't remember if it's in District 1 or District 2, fire station future site. It's the very next site for the next fire station. We're really kind of loath, given where it is on a major arterial, to give that site up, and we think we want to retain that site. But there are some other property that we have 60 acres we don't believe we're ever going to use that has sat vacant, that was originally part of a bond program, that we probably need to come back and say, okay, I don't have a use for that. They range in those sorts of things, and so that's what we're continuing to tease through. We'll always be coming back to you to share with you what we know. What we know is the needs for the departments in the near and medium term, and continue the process forward.
And I'm sure we're all glad he's gone, but he did have his uses. I should thank now County Supervisor Bill Gates for his work on this in the past, because I thought that was really, I'm not a tech guy, but I do think for our website that seemed pretty clear and had good information and so forth, and should be very usable by the people who want to buy stuff from us, which is our goal here. So thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. And if you are not a tech guy, but Tim is, so Tim, will you tell us a little bit about your background?
Thanks for the question. So as Paul mentioned, I'm an MA2 in the city manager's office. I actually have an MBA, and I've been helping with special projects, primarily research projects at the CMO. So that's my primary strength. So for example, for the website, I use my research background to go and look at what some of the major cities are doing. It was kind of a hodgepodge. Some cities may just do a straight list, some do brochures, some do a map. I think ours pulls together the best of all that's out there. So that's kind of the expertise that I bring as a research background.
I know we often put you on difficult projects or important projects, so thank you. It's good to have you. I think this is a project that means a lot to the entire city council, and we're glad that we're moving forward with it, so thank you.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Wonderful.
Madam Chair, it would be helpful to us if we could have a motion and an action today, because it helps us advance this to the full city council.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Passes unanimously. Thank you. And we will continue on with our efforts to develop city-owned property with a request for proposals for vacant lots near Matthew Henson in District 8, and welcome our Housing Director, Cindy Stadler.
Thank you. Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the subcommittee. With me today is Angela Duncan, Deputy Director over Development. And after the last presentation, some of you might be wondering how in the world the Housing Department ended up with 34 vacant lots in the area of Matthew Henson development. And it all started back in 2001 when the city received $35 million from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development in the form of a Hope 6 grant to redevelop the Matthew Henson community. Matthew Henson was 372 units at the time of aged and obsolete public housing built in 1941 and then also in 1952. It was two big sections of housing. At the time, we had a plan for redevelopment that included a lot of multifamily properties, multifamily housing properties, including one senior property and several family properties. At the same time, included in that plan was hopefully to build some single-family affordable homes in the neighborhood surrounding Matthew Henson, excuse me, which is in the area of 7th Avenue and Buckeye Road. At the time, we believe that we had the opportunity to leverage all of that $35 million in Hope 6 funds and use low-income housing tax credits, and that's how we built all the multifamily housing there. We kind of ran out of Hope 6 funds at the same time the recession happened in 2007, and that made the development of single-family affordable properties infeasible at the time. So we moved the money that we had left over to, I just lost it. Down payment assistance, sorry. Down payment assistance. So folks who could find housing in other areas of the city, when the housing market crashed, there was a lot of cheap, very cheap housing located in other areas of the city. So the down payment assistance helped low-income buyers attain those housing units. So these lots have sat vacant for a long time, since 2007, and some of them before that. There's 34 lots, as I said, in this area. The housing department is currently maintaining them. They're all vacant. They're all dust controlled, weed controlled. We take care of dumping. We estimate that we're spending up to $50,000 a year to maintain these. So we're very happy to be coming to you today with an RFP, hopefully to develop these properties and get them off of our books for maintenance. We're very excited about that. The project area, as you saw before, is in the vicinity of 7th Avenue and Buckeye Road. So there's 34 properties in this area, and it's very hard to see, but they're all marked in red up here. Some of them south of Buckeye Road, most of them south of Buckeye Road, between 7th Avenue and 15th Avenue, and some of them north of Buckeye Road. We did acquire these lots with federal funds, so there are restrictions on the sale of these, so we can't just throw them on the website with the other properties. These are specifically designated for affordable housing. So when we issue an RFP, the developer has to build affordable housing and sell them only to families under 80% of area median income. So in the RFP, we're looking for a number of things. The proposed development approach, we are looking for someone who has an impact on the neighborhood and an idea of how to impact the neighborhood in the right way. We want them to be involved. We want them to meet with the community. We would like them to commit to the community and engage the neighborhood in any neighborhood improvements that could be done at the same time these housing properties are developed. We would like them to develop the properties consistent with the neighborhood, so we don't have houses that look out of place in the neighborhood. We want to make sure that the properties flow and everything just benefits the neighborhood. We're also looking for qualifications, someone with experience in building affordable properties, someone who has the financial capacity to build affordable properties like this and probably offer some down payment assistance or connections with down payment assistance. We're looking at the costs, obviously, and feasibility, and a project timeline. We're hoping to put some boundaries on this project. We want build out in 5 years. And if there's no build out, we're going to develop some timeline requirements, and the properties might come back to us if they do not get the build out done. We actually want these properties developed, and so does the neighborhood. So we want to make sure we put timeframes on this. So all that said, we're looking for a recommendation from you today to issue an RFP for the disposition and development of 34 residential single-family city-owned vacant lots for affordable home ownership. And we're looking for approval to begin negotiations with the recommended proposer. We will come back with the proposition before we enter into a contract to talk about the details.
Wonderful, thank you. I have constituents who are excited to meet their future neighbors, so I'm glad we're moving forward with this particular item. When I was running for office, we had 3 neighborhoods where we had significant residential vacant lot holdings, 24th Street and Broadway, Garfield, and this community. And I'm, with today's vote, if it is positive, we will be moving forward in all 3 of those at once. So I'm glad that we're reinvesting in the neighborhoods and really helping fulfill promises that we have to keep up on. So thank you for your leadership on this. Will we be having a community meeting out in the community so we can update our residents about their future neighbors?
Vice Mayor, yes, we will have the community meeting prior to issuing the RFP, so we can update the neighbors and get their input on the composition of the RFP if they have any special considerations that we need to incorporate.
Wonderful. It's a great community with a lot of rich history. And since we're coming up on March Madness, I will say it's produced a lot of our best basketball players in NCAA history. So a lot to celebrate there. Do we have any questions from my colleagues?
No, just simply want to not only thank you, Cindy, for your leadership, you, Vice Mayor, for yours on this topic, and this is good for our city.
Wonderful. Well, this will be a win for the community, and it'll be great to see what proposers say, as well as what the community says they really value in this area. It's not terribly far from the South Central light rail extension, and we've been getting a lot of interest in the area. And this is also an area where we've recently been doing a lot of streets investments as well. So I think it's an area where the city is working together, and it's really revitalizing our streetscape, and then hopefully we'll have a nonprofit or private sector partner to revitalize the lots as well. So with that, I would entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Passes unanimously. Thank you. Continuing this morning's theme, we will have welcome our Economic Development Director up here for RFP for disposal and disposition on Fifth Avenue.
Did Chris become our economic
Nope, we will not recommend.
I was gonna say it.
Madam Chairman, Chris Hallett from the Neighborhood Services Department.
Chris's are interchangeable.
Yes, good morning, Vice Mayor, members of subcommittee. I'm Chris Hallett, Director of Neighborhood Services. However, we are here partnering with our fellow friends at Community and Economic Development. We have Zanon Keating and Eric Johnson here in support of our efforts. We are here to ask for approval from the subcommittee and a recommendation to full City Council to be able to issue an RFP, request for proposals, to develop this historically significant lot in the Roosevelt area. As mentioned in the prior presentation, this is the lot adjacent to the Teapot that was notable in the Thanksgiving Day article. It has a history. It took a 2-year process of condemnation in eminent domain to acquire this in 2002. Subsequent to that, we did have it under an agreement for development that fell through due to financial issues. Subsequent to that, it did burn, and then we had our recession that hit before we were able to get to this point. So today we are here to present to you the RFP proposal process, and I will kick it over to Zanon for that process.
Thank you. Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. So the first step in the process, besides obviously coming and requesting approval or support to issue the RFP, is the community input step of the process. We look to the community to see what they actually want to see on this particular property. There has been a date change. We show April 4th as our date of going to the Roosevelt Action Association. We were able to actually move that up to March 21st to give us a little bit more time as we're going through this process of evaluating that criteria, making sure that it's in the RFP in a very appropriate and comprehensive manner. They were gracious enough to be able to get us on that agenda, and they feel comfortable in being able to advertise that date to the community as well. So that's when we will be looking for community input. The next step is looking at what kind of criteria we want to look for proposers, or we're requesting from proposers. The first is first and most important, and that's why it has the highest point total, is the concept to activate the property. That's really where you look at the scope, the design of the property, whether or not it's historically compatible with the surrounding community. Those sorts of things are really what we're going to be looking at from the proposers on this particular item. Financial return to the city is the second item. Obviously very important. The city did pay for this particular property, and so we want to make sure that we're getting the appropriate return for the property. And then qualifications and experience of the proposer. As Chris noted, this has been under contract before. We want to make sure that somebody who is coming in and proposing to the city is very well qualified, is able to develop this as they've promised, and can move this property forward and back onto the tax rolls. I think my thumbs are too big for this clicker. So the timeline that we're looking at, obviously we're here today at the Sustainable Housing Efficiency and Neighborhood Subcommittee. We're also going to the Downtown Aviation Economy and Innovation Subcommittee on March 1st because of this property's location within downtown Phoenix. We're scheduled for City Council formal on March 22nd. As I noted, we've actually moved the Roosevelt Action Association up to their March meeting, which is on March 21st, in time for City Council. So it will be nice to have a little bit of preliminary feedback at that point. And then we're hoping to issue this RFP in April. Due to timing, that's the earliest that we can issue it at this point. Summer is when we're going to go through the panel, hopefully start negotiations at that point with a selected proposer, and then in fall we hope to return to subcommittee and ultimately City Council with the recommended proposal and business terms. So with that, staff requests that the Sustainability, Housing, and Efficiency Neighborhood Subcommittee recommend City Council approval to issue the RFP to select a development team, begin the negotiations for the sale of this infill property at 814 North Fifth Avenue. Available for any questions.
Vice Mayor, if I may add, just, it came up earlier. So this is a CDBG Community Development Block Grant acquired. So any proceeds resulting from this would be coming back to council through program income, be reprogrammed as for federal funds use. And additionally, it costs, we have about, as a department, 300 properties. We spend about $50 a lot per month to maintain those properties, predominantly as general fund. Regardless of how it was acquired, we have to maintain it with general fund in order to preserve the nature of the federal funds. So that's costing us $15,000 per month just for those that could be saved once these are redeveloped.
Wonderful. So significant savings to the general fund. Thank you. On the evaluation criteria, when we have a lot of plans, particularly in our downtown area and Complete Streets, other programs, will concept to activate the property include making sure it's consistent with our downtown master plan and other?
Madam Chair, yes. Staff is anticipating that within the scope of the RFP, that would be something required criteria really that we're looking at is how it conforms with all of those plans and the goals and guidelines within those.
Wonderful. Thank you. We work hard on those plans and want to make sure that
Absolutely.
we are moving them forward whenever we have an opportunity. Councilman Waring, did you have?
No, I didn't.
Okay. Diane Barker has filled out a card, marked in favor.
Well, thank you, Vice Mayor Kate Gallego and Subcommittee Diane Barker. In District 7, of which this property is, I've happened to live across the street from 4 years from this property, and I've enjoyed going to the Teapot. Very nice people there. I was happy to see the city responded and put a fence around this particular property in question because it is dirt and it hasn't been dust-proof and it was being used. So with that, I'd like to say on all the other city-owned property, that's something that should be looked at. And another reason to dispose of general city property. And the other thing, knowing how important outreach is and having been in real estate, I'd like to see somebody from the city get on the phone and call people that have owned property next to these odd lots that the city has and see if they'd like to purchase it. I think that'd be a quick way to expedite. But back to this property, what I've read, home agreements, CBDG, and different low credit tax or another acronym that's for that, for affordable housing, all the things the city does. And it's very important that we project the values to the human beings that occupy these properties because on transit-oriented development, of which this is near there, and you don't see the people next door that we made a big investment, using it. And the other thing, they have a negativity for it. I'd like to see that we would be expansive for Xeriscape in the area. Historically, we look at all green lots there, but Roosevelt, I'm a member of Roosevelt Action, and I asked them if it was stipulated that it had to be historically that way. No. We are falling behind California. They're heading Xeriscape, and we're on a desert. So I would like to see that they do that. And the other reason is that the keepers that come for the grass blow it out in the street and blow it around. That's a dust problem. Then the refuge, which is all that nice green grass and everything, it gets thrown into the garbage. And so we really need to move on with this in the sustainability. I really am kind of sad that you're taking sustainability out of housing. If you're doing that, it's good for the environment part of the departments, but remember, all of the departments have a goal, I understand, for the city to cut down on emissions and for the neighborhoods. Thank you.
Thank you. Any council member questions? Are we ready for a motion? We have a motion to approve.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Passes unanimously. Thank you and good luck.
Thank you.
We'll move to item 10, improvements to procurement of goods and services. And welcome our Chief Financial Officer, Denise Olson. up.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. With me today is Jim Campion. He's our Deputy Finance Director, and he's over all of our procurement activities in the city. Today, we want to give you an overview or an update on all the improvements that we've done to procurement over the last couple of years. And we also want to talk about improvements that the Advanced Phoenix team recently came up with as part of their process in looking at our procurement processes. They have some recommendations to further efficiencies and some cost savings. So first, just to talk about some of the improvements that we've made over the last couple of years. Per council direction, we've implemented the first procurement code, and this was implemented in January of 2015. Soon after that, we brought on e-procurement, also known as Procure Phoenix, and that's our e-procurement system. With the code and with the system, we have been able to make sure that all of our procurement processes are consistent throughout the city, and this makes it a lot easier for our vendors. They know what to do no matter what department they're dealing with in terms of a procurement process. We've also implemented a procurement plan. So at the beginning of each year, we can figure out what procurements need to be done. This last year, we had about 700 procurement items that we needed to complete. And then there is a one-stop shop for our vendors now. So they go to one place in our system and register. And so this makes it, again, easier for them to get access to all the solicitations throughout the city. So with all these improvements, we are actually seeing some results. So I just want to show you what we've seen over the last few years. Before the code, we had a number of protests, probably around 15. Now, after we've implemented the procurement code, we're only looking at about 4 protests last fiscal year, and none of those ended up in an administrative hearing, which means they had no merit. So we are seeing some improvements because now everyone understands the rules that we're following. The other thing is the number of vendors in our system. Before we had about 9,000 vendors that we had registered in our system. Now we're up to 12,000, and that number keeps growing. We've partnered up with PIO. They've created this really cool video which entices our vendors to register in the system. And we also have partnered up with Local First, and we have a workshop with Local First at Burton Bar Library on Thursday so that we can get additional vendors into the system. The more vendors in the system, the better off we are, because that gives us more competition for citywide services. In terms of contracts, before, all the departments were responsible for their contracts, and we had contracts in all kinds of places. Now we have them centralized in the system. We know how many contracts each department has, we know what we're buying, we know who our vendors are, and we can use this data to help us make analytics for future solicitations. Also, in the system, we have better controls. We can make sure that what we're being priced for is what is in the contract. We can make sure that everything that is shipped to the city is to a City of Phoenix address, so that's a very important control. We make sure that council authorization is required for all payment ordinances. Anything over $8,600 has to be approved by the council. And then also we have good contract management. We have a 3-way match, which means anything that we buy matches what is delivered, matches what we're being invoiced for. So that's just a best practice. And then also we're able to monitor the payments to our vendors. So these are all things that our improvements have resulted in over the last several years. But we don't want to stop there, and so the Advanced Phoenix team came in and also reviewed our processes. Jim Campion was part of that team, and he's going to talk to you about what they're recommending.
Thank you, Denise. Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, As you recall, in October, the city staff provided the subcommittee with an update regarding the Advanced Phoenix team. Here are the goals, as you recall, for the Advanced Phoenix team. And the city's procurement process was the first to go through the Kaizen review. It was chosen by the advanced team. And we want to share with you the findings of this. This is actually a blueprint of the formal procurement process to buy a piece of equipment in the city of Phoenix. And it's the procurement code, it's for a formal procurement process over $50,000. And the procurement code defines any formal process over $50,000 has to be competitively bid, advertised. This process, the analysis showed from scope of work drafting to issuance of the solicitation to evaluation of the bids, council award, and finally execution of the contract was taking in excess of 300 days. Central Procurement conducted this process 300 times last fiscal year. So the team discovered that it takes the time it takes to complete $1 million purchase for equipment is the same time it takes to buy one, say, that's $75,000. So the team began to explore ways to reduce the cycle time. What can we do? The team identified a number of process improvements. Some of which are being addressed currently by the Kaizen team. Some of the improvements are low-hanging fruit, while others are going to take additional time, policy changes or procedure adjustments. Some of the quick fixes we've already implemented are we've implemented contract management training. It was held for over 120 city staff that have a role in contract management or procurement. We're working with the law department. We've developed standard procurement templates for use by city procurement officers across the city to develop consistency so vendors see consistent procurements. Additionally, we develop a scope of work guideline to help assist departments write scope of works so that they can have clearer, get better results on their procurements. And additionally, each department now has a procurement liaison. So longer term goals, they include create a strategic sourcing team for goods and services. One of the ideas the team came up with is Phoenix could be a lead agency on a cooperative procurement process. For instance, for garbage trucks, public works departments buy garbage trucks. Many cities around the valley buy garbage trucks. We could be the lead agency, and other agencies that participate and purchase off of our contract would actually pay the city of Phoenix an administrative fee. We want to align our sourcing method process with comparable standards. Just so you know, the team discovered after looking at a comparison of other cities and agencies around the valley, the city has low thresholds for its purchasing methods. So that's why we're here today, to discuss the possibility of increasing the thresholds. Here are the current sourcing method thresholds in the procurement code currently. Just quickly, I'll go over them. I won't give you a lot of detail. The small dollars, the departments are delegated this authority, and they can purchase anything up to under $5,000. This is a quick process. They can get quotes, or they can make some phone calls. And as I said, this process just takes a couple days. The informal process is $5,000 to under $50,000. And that is doing competitive quotes, reaching out to small businesses and vendors that are registered in our system. And then if the quotes come in exceeding $8,600, we go to council for request for approval for payment ordinance approval. That process takes about 45 days on average. And then, as you know, the formal process, as I mentioned, is taking in excess of 300 days. As Denise mentioned, we have about 700 items on the central procurement plan that we're working through this year. So one of the things I just want to make note is the difference between the payment ordinance amount and the small dollar amount there, the $5,000, $8,600, and I'll talk about that. So just for comparison purposes, the team pulled all the procurement thresholds from other cities and agencies around the valley here. And as you can see, we use a lot of state of Arizona cooperative contracts and Maricopa County contracts. And as you can see, our thresholds do not align with their thresholds. They're formal process, their informal process is under 100,000, and anything over 100 is their formal process. City of Tempe just changed theirs, increasing theirs from 50,000 to 100,000. So, this is the proposal of the Kaizen team. And as you remember, I do want to point out, the council will still see anything over $8,600. But we would like to align the small dollar purchase and the payment ordinance amount to be, the small dollar purchase would be $8,600. That way the departments could be delegated that authority, but anything over $8,600 would still come to central procurement to be sourced as an informal process. The under 100, changing the informal competitive process from 50 to 100,000 would streamline the procurement process, and we would end up being able to process those procurements within the 45-day time allotment. A lot of those procurements versus the 300 days that it's currently taking on some of the ones that say are $55,000. We have to go through the lengthy formal process. And then, of course, the formal competitive process to align with the other agencies and also the federal government is anything over 100,000 would be a formal competitive process. So, what is the Kaizen team felt very strongly that this would save a lot of time on a lot of procurements. It would streamline, especially the under $100,000 procurement process. So we can get those done in 45 days, get payment ordinance approval, and move forward. It would obviously allow us to work on more strategic procurements. We have the procurement plan looking for like procurements from different departments, so we could work on and dedicate our time to the formal process while the other processes are done much quicker. The vendors enjoy the informal process because they can just submit a quote and they know within a period of time how quickly they get the business or not. And then, as Denise mentioned, Thursday I'm going to the Burton Bard Library. We do a lot of outreach to the small businesses. We want to get them registered. Obviously, with the $100,000 threshold, there'd be more opportunity for small businesses and local vendors as well to do those quickly. And as a reminder, I know that this is important. City Council approval is still required for anything over $8,600. So I just wanted to kind of give you a little overview, and if you have any questions, Denise will take the next slide.
The other thing that the Kaizen team looked at was this idea of strategic buying. This is really a buzzword that's going on in the industry right now, where we buy things in a smart manner versus just going through processes. As Jim mentioned, we'd really like to do more cooperatives and actually be a lead agency as such. We think we're large enough that we can offer a lot of opportunities to other entities in the area. We also want to combine procurements from individual departments where it's feasible. If we're all buying the same thing, but we have 26 different contracts, we might be able to get better pricing if we put it under one contract, and we basically work the economies of scale there. And then, as Jim mentioned, if we increase the thresholds, we can really target small local businesses, because if you think about it, a $100,000 contract really is about $20,000 a year, assuming that most of our contracts are 5 years. And these are things that small businesses are going to be more likely to submit a bid on. And then also, using the data in the system is going to be a huge advantage. You know, think of a shopping cart. You go to the grocery store, you put all your stuff in your shopping cart. We're going to know exactly what we're buying now. We know how many pencils, how much paper, and all this sounds real boring, but it actually helps us do very accurate solicitations so that bidders can give us exact pricing. So that should help us with saving cost. So overall, we want to be strategic moving forward. We want to add capacity to what we're doing now, do more procurements by increasing the thresholds. And we also think all of this is going to result in efficiencies and money savings. And so we're not really looking for any recommendations today or council action today, but we would like to talk to you a little bit more, get your feedback, and then come back in March with some recommendations.
Thank you so much. I remember when I was a director, procurement always drove me crazy because I could see how it wasn't the most cost-effective way to do things. I can remember a time, and he's already gone, but Councilman Waring and Councilman Gates got all over my department because we were trying to purchase tough books, and they were very expensive, and I concurred with them. It's ridiculous, some of the things that we have to spend money on that we could get cheaper at a Best Buy or Fry's Electronic or something like that. So I really applaud what you're doing. I really think this is an area where we can really start to save money for the city. I appreciate you going through the Kaizen process. I've been through that, and it's rigorous.
Yeah.
And so I applaud what you're doing, and hopefully maybe you can come back and give us some ideas of numbers of money, how we're saving money. That would be beneficial for me. But thank you. This is great.
Thank you for your work on this and for being part of the team. It looked like it was
Yeah. It was
an
quite-
informative but probably long process. The council memo mentioned that we might charge an administrative fee when we were doing strategic procurements, and it suggested 1%. So that seems like for large procurements, it might be a profit center, and for the smallest ones, it might not cover our costs.
Vice Mayor, yes, we actually use contracts currently that we would purchase, say, fire trucks for Houston, Galveston. We'll pay a 1% fee to use that contract. Now, my plan is obviously working with the fire department. We have a lot of people want to buy what Phoenix is buying, Phoenix Fire is buying, or so we'd like to lead those and actually collect that 1% for the city of Phoenix.
But it would definitely cover our costs?
Yes.
It would seem like for a smaller procurement, 1% would.
And it would also obviously bring us, national discounts, because we get a lot of requests for people to say, hey, what's Phoenix Fire buying? We'd like to participate. Or what's the City of Phoenix Public Works buying? Those type of things. And the procurement plan is helping us identify those areas, because we just implemented, this is the first year. But as we go forward, I'd like to see it actually grow into a 3-year a vision of what we're looking to purchase so that we can plan accordingly and get out in front of these. Because as I said, working with the vendor communities and the vendors on these large procurements, it takes a consolidated effort to bring those together.
Great, thank you.
Mhm.
We appreciate the update. We'll look forward to
Thank you.
hearing the item for action soon. We will move to item 11, the award of homes, community development block grant, and affordable housing funds. Welcome.
Madam Chair, if I might, I know Cindy's going to give us a great presentation, but I would like to remove item 8 from consideration this year. I have received over 200 emails and calls, and I suspect my colleague from District 5 has probably received a lot more than I have. I know it's in District 5, but I think the developer really needs to reach out and work with the neighborhood a little bit more. And so as we move forward, I think we have some great requests for funding recommendations. I just can't support item 8, which is 1825 West Northern. Thank you.
And Vice Mayor, I was actually prepared to do the same thing, and well, no, Councilwoman Stark, you've been amazing to work with in this entire area, and you definitely have your finger on the pulse of this community, and I know you've been receiving the email as I have, and you know this issue very, very well, given your experience. So I agree. I think it can be a good project. It certainly is a good partner, but there has to be a lot of work, a lot more work done in the community, connecting with the community to move forward on that one. So I'm willing to move everything forward except for 8 this time as well.
Wonderful, thank you. With that, we will turn it over to Cindy Stotler for a presentation and foreshadowing that item 8 may not be moving forward.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the subcommittee. With me again is Angela Duncan, Deputy Director over Development, in case there are any detailed questions that I can't answer. Every year, the city publishes a consolidated plan. It's a federal requirement, and it tells, among other things, tells us the need for affordable housing in the city of Phoenix. Right now, there are over 98,000 households in Phoenix that are earning under 80% of area median income and are in need of housing assistance. 80% of area median income for a family of 4 is about $50,000 a year. In addition, there are about 6,000 sheltered and unsheltered homeless in Phoenix, and almost 30,000 special needs residents, elderly, disabled victims of human trafficking, victims of domestic violence, seriously mentally ill, and veterans, among others. All of these individuals are in need of housing. To address just some of the housing needs out there in the city of Phoenix, the Housing Department uses its annual allocation of home and community development block grant funds to provide financing for new development and rehabilitation of affordable housing. Our community priorities are set every year, and they're consistent with the special needs populations that are found in the consolidated plan. In addition, one of our priorities is the applications that are submitted by community housing development organizations that are nonprofits and are, some of them I'll talk about in the future, right next. I've lost my train of thought, sorry. Some of them I'll be talking about right now. I'm pleased to present some of the recent community developments that we've seen for affordable housing. Cedar Crossing, number one, Native American Connections developed this. Native American Connections is a community housing development organization. This is a 74-unit family development that serves very low-income individuals with chronic substance abuse. Victory Place, also bottom right, is a Cloudbreak community, 96 units of permanent supportive housing for homeless or formerly homeless. And another one recently opened is Madison Gardens, low-income residents, 55 and older, supportive services. West Cap developed this 133-unit, serving senior citizens. Affordable housing developments are good neighbors. Today's affordable housing developments are indistinguishable from market rate developments, and that's on purpose. We don't want to stand out. We want affordable, low-income folks to live in the same kind of housing community with the same quality as market rate neighbors. Because of the funding sources, though, affordable developments receiving city loans are monitored for the entire affordability period, which can be 30 to 40 years. That monitoring includes on-site inspections for property maintenance, good condition, making them good neighbors for a long time. So some of the older units that we're seeing, Urban Living 2, also Native American Connections, and Encana Point, also Native American Connections. These two developments are in neighborhoods that have seen revitalization after the affordable housing came in. So it's a very good setup in some neighborhoods that need redevelopment. Sometimes it encourages other development around it. Today, the city is recommending 11 projects for funding. Some of these projects, 8 of the 11 projects, are reliant on low-income housing tax credits to actually develop. So 8 of the 11 projects will be going in for submittal to the Arizona Department of Housing on March 1st to receive low-income housing tax credits. Our funding, we have funded 8 of these projects. We usually see about 2 or 3 projects a year funded in the city of Phoenix, so probably 2 or 3 of the 8 that we're recommending will get funded. That's the likelihood. Our funding is contingent upon zoning and site plan approval, and it is also contingent on receiving the low-income housing tax credit awards. So that's why we're funding 8, we're committing funding for 8. Likelihood we'll only fund 2 or 3 because those are the amount of projects that will get the low-income housing tax credit awards. So of the 11 projects, I'm going to describe each one of them quickly. 19 North at the top is United Methodist Outreach Ministries, proposing 54 units. They're asking for $1.373 million. The special needs population they're serving is domestic violence and disabled persons. The second one, 609 Housing, is by Native American Connections. They are a Chodo again, 63 units serving chronically individuals with chronic substance abuse, and they're asking for $1.9 million. Acacia Heights, submitted by Foundation for Senior Living, also a community housing development organization, 50 units serving low-income families at 60% or below of AMI, which for a family of 4 is about $37,000 a year. They're recommended for $400,000. The next project is De Colores, submitted by Chicanos por la Causa, 79 units for victims of domestic violence. They're asking for $2 million. Next is El Caro Homes, Gardner Capital Development of Arizona, 50 units of single-family rental homes, recommended for $1.5 million, serving persons with disabilities. Horace Steele Commons is next from Arizona Housing, Inc. and West Cap, 90 homeless units serving chronically homeless persons and persons with serious mental illness, recommended for $2 million. They are actually rehabbing 84 existing units and adding 6 new units to Horace Steele Commons. Rehoboth Place 2, Rehoboth Community Development Corporation, 53 units serving low-income residents, recommended for $500,000. And Ravello Apartments, 76 units serving elderly and persons with disabilities, recommended for $775,000. Laurel Tree at Northern Catholic Charities Community Service, 64 units serving veterans and their families, recommended for $2 million. LCSA, Labor's Community Service Agency, rehabilitation of 5 units serving homeless and disabled persons, recommended for $60,600. And last, PSA Rehabilitation, PSA Behavioral Health Agency, rehabbing 7 units serving persons with serious mental illness, recommended for $137,000. So today we're asking for your approval to reprogram community development block grants from critical core city development programs to ensure funding for respective affordable housing projects that we've just listed, and also loan and disperse home, community development block grants, and or affordable housing funds in the amount of $12.7 million.
Wonderful, and a speed record, thank you. We have a large number of cards available to speak if requested, all marked in favor. Is there anyone who filled out a card who would like to speak? All right, with that, do you want to do a formal motion codifying?
Yeah, I would move for the recommendation that's listed with the deletion of Laurel Tree at Northern located at 1825 West Northern.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Passes 3-0. Thank you. Our grand finale presentation is Graffiti Awareness Month, which we mark in February. We'll welcome Chris Hallett back up.
Yes, good morning, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. February is Graffiti Free Awareness Month. This is large part due to your efforts, Vice Mayor, as co-chairing our anti-graffiti task force, as well as I'd like to acknowledge Ginny Ann Sumner back there, who was a member of that task force and now is chair of a citizen-led initiative to continue to combat graffiti, anti-graffiti initiatives, the CLEG. Today with me to help give you an update, I have Deputy Directors Darcy Kober, who oversees our graffiti abatement programs, and Linda Dodd, who oversees our engagement and outreach, and they will provide an update on the efforts during this year's campaign.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the subcommittee. Graffiti has a negative impact on individuals, homes, businesses, and schools in our neighborhoods throughout the city. Graffiti Busters crews remove graffiti reported through various ways. There we go. And also coordinate with other public and private agencies to remove graffiti. Prompt removal reduces the chance of graffiti reappearing and help maintains a safe and attractive neighborhood. The Neighborhood Services Department has approximately 20 staff in the Graffiti Busters program who are removing graffiti in our neighborhood 7 days a week. And they have removed annually approximately 62,000 sites using over 11,000 gallons of paint. The majority of the complaints are addressed in less than 1 day. I'd like to say a special thank you to our graffiti staff who do a wonderful job. They provide a high level of customer service, as well as the Code Compliance Manager, Patrick Ravenstein, who's in the audience with us today, who oversees that group. The Graffiti Busters remove graffiti for free. However, a signed permission slip from the property owner or other responsible party is required. Graffiti staff also assist neighborhood groups with supplies for cleanups, and they provide instruction on how to use paint sprayers and power washers. Last year, staff assisted 220 groups like this. For the last 3 years, the City of Phoenix has celebrated Graffiti Free Awareness Month in February. Individuals, neighborhoods, and corporate organizations are encouraged to join the city in keeping it graffiti free. On the slide there is our poster that's displayed in several of our partner departments, also on social media and on the web. And it's also been used by some of our partners, such as the City of Mesa. As part of this campaign this year, we put it out to several of our sister cities, and the City of Mesa has indicated that they'd like to partner with us on future campaigns, which is great. They were actually out with us last week at our graffiti warehouse, learning more about our operations, and we intend to do the same. We want to thank the Mayor and Councilman Nowakowski, and also Vice Mayor Gallego, for hosting a press conference on January 31st to kick off the campaign. Councilman Nowakowski, as Chris mentioned, and the Vice Mayor were our former co-chairs of the Anti-Graffiti Task Force. The mayor signed a proclamation recognizing February as the Graffiti Free Awareness Month. The event also included our neighborhood leaders, NSD Neighborhoodosaurus, and other city departments painting out graffiti to show how easy it can be to remove blight in your neighborhoods. Next, we have Linda Dodd, who will show you a video from our press conference.
So, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, here's a look at the campaign and how it kicked off with you.
Would you tell us some of the people who are in this video?
I will. So there was a little bit of competition going on that morning, and it was egged on by our Neighborhoodosaurus. We do have the mayor there, Councilman Nowakowski, and we have community leaders. We have Jenny Ann Sumner to the right. We have members of the Estrella Supermoms who came out, and Suzanne Thrain came out. They all wanted to participate in this wonderful event and kick off Graffiti Free Awareness Month. So how we did the awareness campaign this year, we really want to do a robust campaign. When you think of graffiti, you really don't think about it as being a really serious criminal activity, but according to law enforcement agencies, they will tell you that it really is a gateway type of crime. So when they engage in that kind of activity as youth, they typically will move on to more serious crimes as they get older, and that's what we want to help mitigate. So we do a great job on Darcy's End. We remove the graffiti. We do it within 24 hours. We're an internationally recognized agency for that. But we also want to make sure that we have a robust education campaign because we want to grab the youth at a very young age. We also want to educate our community in how they can help and combat graffiti. So we hit it with the public service announcements. I don't know if you listened to KTAR. They were running those promos, Phoenix Channel 11, social media on Facebook and Twitter. I really want to do a shout out to Amanda Griffin. She's our management assistant too, and Tamara Ingersoll from the PIO office. They did a wonderful job putting this campaign together for us this year. Tamara's also able to get us electronic billboards at Cityscape and the Convention Center for free. Love free, because that we don't really have any money. Newsletters and posters. If you've been walking through City Hall, you'll notice that we have posters out with the campaign that you see up front. We also had other departments that sponsored this, from the Parks Department and others as well. We also hosted our graffiti wipeout events. We started those last October and wanted to make sure that we were running full speed as we got into the Graffiti Free Awareness Month. And then we also do school presentations as part of our education campaign. Now, our Graffiti Buster staff are phenomenal at what they do, and our volunteers really are the backbone. They're the backbone of the Graffiti Free program. Like I said, we hosted 5 Wipe It Out events this year. We have Lee Staten in the audience. He's our volunteer coordinator, and I can tell you that having a dedicated volunteer coordinator has really increased our level of volunteer engagement in our community. And with those 5 volunteers, or about 5 events, we had about 70 volunteers at each of those events, about 300 volunteers that helped with graffiti wipeout events. So to give you kind of an overall picture of what the volunteer impact is in our community, we have over 3,900 Black Buster volunteers and NSD volunteers. And they were able to remove over 1,300 graffiti sites this past year. So with just the graffiti efforts, that's 2,200 hours removing graffiti. That saved the city to $50,000. And the overall volunteer program, to give you the order of magnitude, we were able to save about $400,000 because of the great work that our community participates in. We hear a lot about collaboration within the city departments. We have it in both directions. We have it with the city departments. We also have it with our community. Pictured here is Detective Chuck Miller from the police department, and we also have Detective Mike Kaditz. They're both in the audience. They've done a phenomenal job. You recognize when people really have a passion for what they do, and those two love what they do. They really want to make sure that we don't have graffiti in Phoenix, and it's a pleasure to work with them. On the flip side, we have the prosecutor's office, so when we're able to send graffiti vandals to the legal system, they're also extremely engaged, and we work as a really good cohesive team. We also had participation from the Maricopa County Prosecutor's Office because a lot of the individuals who do engage in graffiti are youth, and they are the ones who are prosecuting that. And then we also have Phoenix Community Alliance. Now, all of these members that I just mentioned, they are part of the citizen-driven initiative called CLEGI, Citizen Law Enforcement Against Graffiti Initiative. And Ginny Ann Sumner heads that group, and I got to tell you, it's really wonderful to participate in the grassroots effort that Ginny Ann leads. She's put in a lot of hard hours. I hope she's smiling back there, Ginny Ann, because we really do appreciate everything that you do. Another community leader that's part of CLEGI is Suzanne Thrain, who is also pictured in this, standing next to Chris. And she has held so many Wipe It Out events in her community and removing graffiti. So we really appreciate the both of them. There are a lot of community leaders out there, but these guys are the ones who are really stepping it up to make sure that they have a citizen-led effort. Now with that, I want to share with you CLEGI. I don't know, Suzanne or Ginny Ann, if you want to say more about this, but they are sponsoring an anti-graffiti conference this Friday and Saturday. And it's focused on helping practitioners who work to combat graffiti, just like ourselves who are sitting at this table. But it's also there to help community leaders to understand how can they engage in combating graffiti in their communities. What does it take for them to be a leader? You know, how many removals, what's the process that they have to go through? And this is just kind of a glimpse at the agenda for the event this Friday and Saturday. But I want to thank you for supporting Phoenix's graffiti-free efforts. It's a vital component to sustaining our healthy and safe neighborhoods, and thank you for supporting us.
Wonderful, thank you. Could all of the individuals mentioned in that presentation stand up or raise your hand so we can say thank you? We really appreciate your work to helping Phoenix become graffiti-free, so thank you for all of the time, both from city staff and volunteers. It really is important to our city. Any comments from my colleagues?
No, I'm glad you did that. Thank you all. All the credit goes to the people who stood up and like-minded people who are out there. Great video, 50-second video. I noticed some familiar faces there, the Australia Supermoms and so many others. And thank you for your leadership, for continuing to galvanize everyone and moving us forward in this on this topic as well.
And I'd like to echo the sentiments up here. And I've known Jeannie Ann for years, and she's nothing short of wonderful. Thank you so much for what you do. We're lucky to have residents like you that really do care about our city. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you for that great presentation. Do we have any requests from my colleagues for future presentations? We have a busy March, and I'm hopeful we'll have a workforce update, including our efforts on equal pay and hiring a diverse workforce. With that, we are adjourned.